whakapehu te maunga, ko Aotea te waka, ko whanganui te awa, ko rānana te marae, ko Ngāti Ruaka te iwi, ko tēnā te hapu taku he, ko te ati haunui a pāpārangi te iwi. Ko tana kaupapa mo tēnei rangi, strong values are just as important as academic achievement. E hoa, mo te wahanga o Korimako representing St. Andrew's College, Imogen McNeil.
Tēnā koutou. Have you ever heard the story of a boy brought up on the American frontier in the early 1800s who grew up to change the world? He barely went to school, said himself that he had less than 1 year of education, but he had a strong moral compass, and it was that, not any amount of schooling that he received or excelled in, that helped him to shape the world into the one we know today. And have you perhaps heard the story of another boy, this time growing up in Germany, nearly a century later? He went to school. In fact, he attended the University of Munich and became a professor of sports medicine. He was at the peak of his profession. But he didn't have such a strong moral framework. And instead of recognizing the value of his fellow human beings, he treated them abominably and shocked the world. Now, I'm sure we all want to be like the first boy and make a positive difference, but we need to realize that this doesn't happen by chance. And to make sure that we don't leave it to chance, we have to begin with the question of what do we mean by a moral framework? We all have a worldview, right? Some way of looking at the world and trying to make sense of it. Because as we all know, the human condition can be pretty inexplicable sometimes. And within this worldview is a base of morals, of things that we value and strive to live out. Often they can be there without us fully realizing that they are, or even what specifically they are. But in the long run, it's important to work out what your core values are, because then they provide a framework within which to decide how to act. Do we value honesty, or compassion, or success, or generosity, or any of a number of things? Some decisions are easy to make and don't require a lot of thought, like maybe what you want for lunch. Others can be hard and full of potential repercussions. Now, you can probably make the first sort of decision without too much thought going into it, but at some point, you're going to come across a decision that isn't so easy to make. And that is where we need to know what it is we stand for, because if you don't stand for anything, then that is where you are liable to fall for anything. So let's take a look at what happens when you have education, but minimal moral framework. One very real and present example of this today is the question of where science might cross an ethical line. Our scientific and technological power is now greater than ever, but the struggle is making sure that our values are not left behind in the advance. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." If this was true in the 1960s, then surely it is even more true now. It's too easy to just drift along, making passive decisions, until suddenly we find ourselves in a place where we don't want to be. Our circumstances shape us in many ways, and if we end up in an environment that values the wrong things, then pretty soon we're going to value those things too. This is why we need to know what we believe in, so that when we come across things that challenge us, like maybe life-changing events out of our control, or people with opposing beliefs, then we still know how to make the right choices. This is particularly relevant in a world where we have more choices than we know what to do with. Take us as young Māori, for instance. We are having to make decisions around what it looks like to be Māori in the 21st century, how much our heritage would influence our actions, how to act in the face of brand new challenges. If we cannot satisfactorily answer these questions, then as a culture we are going to struggle to move forwards. I've previously talked about moral values, but cultural ones are just as important. Kia mau koe ki ngā kupu o tupuna. We must hold fast to the words of our ancestors, so that our values of manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, whanaungatanga, and others are not lost. Our values are part of who we are, and no matter how smart you are or aren't, they help us to make the right decisions. Now let's go back to those boys that I talked about earlier. The one who became a professor of sports medicine? His name was Carl Gerbhardt, and he later headed the awful medical experiments on the rabbits, a group of female political prisoners at Ravensbrück concentration camp. For all his years of education, he still made the decisions to commit these atrocities. His moral compass was nowhere to be seen. But what about the other boy, the one who said himself that he had only 1 year of education? Well, his name was Abraham Lincoln, and his lack of schooling certainly didn't stop him from having the moral fortitude to fight against the American slave trade. So whether school is something you love, or whether you'd rather be anywhere else, you can still develop your values. In fact, I lay down a whittle for you. Kia kaha, kia toa, kia manawa nui, and stand up for what you believe in, knowing that strong values are just as important as academic achievement. Kia ora. Imogen McNeil from St Andrews College on my te pake pake!